7 years ago, I burnt out for the second time. It was the deepest, darkest place that I've ever been. A place I didn't think I was capable of going. Growing up and even into my adult life, I'd always been that optimistic, see the opportunities. The glass isn't just half full. It's like overflowing. Yep. I was too afraid to admit to anybody what I was going through, because we can't change our actions over the long term if we don't change our belief that is driving that action. But if you truly want to create change, you need to give yourself permission to think about the things that aren't feeling good. Living a life based off of other people's desires or perceived desires versus my own. And if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, it's because you are avoiding opportunities for growth, right? Because this is what I need to thrive. And physically, 100%, right? It did change my mindset. It did change the energy. It did change, what I'm incapable of. It was just another way to prove to myself that, hey, time does exist. And I think that was a really big eye opener for, hey, this time has always existed. I just didn't utilize it before.
Right. Welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craik, and today I'm excited to have Jennifer Keable here. She is a stress and well-being strategist. She's a coach. She's a speaker. So many hats that you wear. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to see what we get into with this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm also very excited about this conversation. Now, I know something that you focus a lot on is like burnout and helping people create sustainability with their success. But I don't want to talk about what you do, because I hate that. I'm like, I always try and put it into words what other people do, and I much prefer just throwing it to you.
Right.
So can you tell me and the audience a little bit more about just what you do and your roles?
Yes, absolutely. So I wear two main hats. One is as a coach. So it's working with those ambitious individuals who really want to achieve great success in their careers, but don't want to give up their well-being anymore. They're sick and tired of giving up their happiness, their health, and it's being able to achieve both of those at the same time. And then for organizations, it's essentially doing that, but in a group collective, right? So it's taking my own experience, my background in psychology, my background with all of my clients, and bringing that into the workplace and talking about topics that often aren't talked about in the workplace, so that for the employees and the organization, everybody can begin to thrive and be around a heck of a lot longer and be more consistent in their action versus just bum in seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I imagine there's quite a difference in working with a team versus working with an individual. But at the end of the day, it always kind of boils down to like making impact with the individuals.
Absolutely. Yes. And so that's why even when I'm a part of a group, I love working with smaller groups. So I love working with groups 15 and under, because I create workshops. They're designed to be interactive. It's designed to share, to get vulnerable to whatever extent that individual is comfortable with, but really to provide that opportunity to reflect in ways that typically we don't give ourselves the time to reflect on.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find that too. I like working with like smaller, more intimate kind of cohorts.
Yeah.
I just find I get more impact that way as well. Not necessarily that I provide more impact that way, but I get more back from the groups that way too, which, as you know, in turn then just creates a much better environment, right?
100%. Yeah.
So how did you start to get into this? Is this something that you had experienced in your own life that you were like, I need to help other people with, or how did it get started?
Well, I feel like, do we have a few hours here? Let's see where I can bring it in.
Yeah.
It really started from a young age. I've always had an interest in positive psychology. So not just psychology, but positive psychology. So that's what my background is in psychology. But throughout my own career, I've burnt out twice in my life. And so 7 years ago, I burnt out for the second time. And when I burnt out that time, it was the deepest, darkest place that I've ever been. A place I didn't think I was capable of going. because growing up and even into my adult life, I'd always been that optimistic, see the opportunities. The glass isn't just half full. It's like overflowing.
Yeah, I know this.
Right. And that's just like who I was at my core. And so when I found myself in this place, it was, beyond scary. It was really confusing. What the heck is going on? I didn't even understand what was happening at the time. But I know now very clearly that what I went through was burnout. At the time I was working as a project manager for a general contractor. I had 2 boys at home under 3 years of age. And I believed at the time that I didn't have time for self-care, right? It was like, no, I'm working a full-time job. I got to put everything into that. Got to give everything to my boys. I'm married, have a house, all of the things. And I started hearing that voice. Jennifer, you need to start taking care of yourself. Jennifer, you need to start taking care of yourself. But I didn't take it seriously enough. I started to listen thinking, okay, if I go to an aerial yoga class once every 2 weeks, that's got to be enough, right? Like somehow 1 hour within a lot of hours is going to be enough for all the stress I endured. And
it's like checking the boxes.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, I did my self-care check.
Right. Yeah. I was checking the box of self-care versus actually doing it in a way that felt right, that was actually fueling me. And because I didn't take it seriously enough, the one day I just completely crashed and everything came pouring out. And it was from that stage on where I slowly had to figure out, okay, what is going on? But when I say it was scary, I was yelling and screaming and crying and pulling my hair and really acting in ways that I didn't think I was capable of. And you and I have talked about imposter syndrome before. And I, again, never would have thought that that was something that I was also going through in that moment. So I was too afraid to admit to anybody what I was going through. Right? My husband saw it because there was no hiding it in the same 4 walls that we lived in. But I didn't tell my mom, I didn't tell my sister, I didn't tell my best friend, I didn't tell the doctor. And what I realize now is that it was because I was too afraid of people seeing me not as a success. Right? Because successful people, I keep shaking this thing.
You're good. Yeah.
I'm such a hand talker.
Yeah, I am too. I get it.
But I was so afraid of being seen in this light that was not a success because I thought success meant that you only acted a certain way, right? You achieved certain things. And although I had achieved those in the moment or those days or those weeks, I was not acting like a success. And so I thought if I admitted it out loud, it would somehow steal away from the entire success I'd spent my entire life trying to build.
Yeah. There's so many things I want to get into with that. But first, you were talking about when you first started to feel this, like you had this belief system. Is that something that you recognize now working with other people as well? And even you can speak on your own experience, but that belief system of like, you truly don't believe you have time. Like you truly are convinced that you can't do this. Like there's just not enough time, or that if I take the time to do this thing, I'm not going to be successful anymore. It's like, it kind of ties into that imposter syndrome. It's kind of what I'm hearing, but I'm curious your thoughts on that, just the belief part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from my own experience and from working with so many others that it is essential that we work through that belief. Because we can't change our actions over the long term if we don't change our belief that is driving that action. And so working with individuals to be able to see and to help them create new beliefs, right? It's about building that new neural pathway. Right now, we just act subconsciously because that neural pathway is so strong. It's been used for so many years. But if we can begin to create a new one that's going to allow you to see that, hey, I actually show up way better as a professional. That's what I started doing, right? Initially, I thought I didn't have time for self-care. And then once I started taking care of me and I started doing more things for myself, I started showing up profoundly differently in the workplace. Even though I was already a star employee, it was the next level. And so showing up that way, showing up with my partner, with my kids, right? When you're running ragged all the time, it's usually the people who we love most who see the worst of us, right? And so before that, I would come home and, my poor children, they're these innocent little things. They're under 3 years old, but I was run ragged and I would just snap. And then, the parent guilt kicks in and, knowing that they don't deserve that and all of those things. And I remember it was like, I always envision myself walking up the stairs because it's from our main floor where we spend most of the time to the bedrooms, right? So I'd be going up the stairs that first time where I remember just snapping at my boys for no good reason. No good reason beside the fact that I hadn't taken care of myself properly for far too long. And then I don't know how long after I really started taking care of myself and prioritizing me. And I remember going up these same stairs and my kids asking me something that previously would have triggered me. And it was almost like I could see the array of options, like a menu in front of me. But this is all happening in probably quarter of a second, right? And I can see the options that are going to serve us. And then just being able to respond in that loving, caring way that I'd always seen myself as being as that mother. And so, going back to the belief system, I just realized I kind of regressed a little bit there, but going back to that belief system, I had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I was doing a speech on burnout, actually. And one of the ladies came up to me after and she said, you know what, this speaks so loudly to me. She's like, you said one key thing there that really hit home for me, and it was permission. She says, I haven't been giving myself permission to take care of me. And so just that one word, she's like, I'm going to hold that with me for so long. And so for the audience, are you giving yourself permission to take care of you? Because that's where it starts. And then put it in your calendar.
Yeah. Right?
We often wait. Let's wait. If there's time. Oh, I'll do it when there's time. Okay, we all know what life is like. There's not going to be time.
There's never enough. There's never the right time.
Right. Yeah. So it's create the time, right? So for me now, one of the things that I do as part of my regular self-care regime, and I have things that I do on a daily, a weekly, and then a monthly basis. So the ones that are longer, of course, would be like the monthly that I can't necessarily fit into every week or every day. But my monthly is I go for a hike with my best friend every 4 weeks, just her and I, nobody else, because we have the most amazing conversations. And for us, we feel it's our best therapy is doing this. And so we put it in our calendar. As soon as we finish our hike, before I drop her off, we already have our next one booked. So we don't wait to see if we're going to have time to do it. We already know because we're booking everything else around it. Yeah.
Very cool. And I think you're talking about this idea of you're kind of like talking yourself through it throughout this whole process. And I think that's such a powerful thing for people to recognize, because I think we all have these conversations with ourselves, right? And even this idea of imposter syndrome, like I know I've experienced that in my life before too. I still experience it sometimes.
Absolutely.
But when you mentioned something that really resonated with me there was when you start actively showing up for these things, you actually start to show up differently in different areas. I've had similar experiences where my kids will be doing something and I'm like thinking back to a time when that I would have snapped. But now again, like you're able to kind of step back and relax and you're like, oh, I'm handling this differently. And it's such a nice and almost empowering feeling to be able to sit back and do that. Yeah. Right. And that's so cool. I'm curious if you were to go back to, you mentioned this version of you that was burning out. You're building to this burnout phase. If you were to go back to that version of you today and you could tell her anything, right, to try to avoid getting to that point, what would you have maybe said to the old version of you?
Well, I think there's a few things that I would say, but one of them, and the first thing that actually comes to my mind, is prioritizing joy. Right? I feel like as busy professionals, we get so busy, caught up in the everyday tasks, that we forget about joy. We forget about just having fun and actually enjoying life. No, I don't have time for that. I got to run to this thing. I got to run to that thing. I can't enjoy this conversation and have laughter and whatever. No, what's the point? What do you need? Let's go. just relax a little bit, right? Just allow yourself to have some joy. And I think when you start your day wondering, I wonder how I can bring joy in, just giving yourself that idea or that question, your brain automatically tries to find ways throughout the day to find joy or to answer that question, because our brain doesn't like having questions unanswered. So
That's true, yeah.
For me, if I would have started my day asking myself that, I think that would have made a big difference too. But I think also, it really comes down to that imposter piece, right? If I had known that I was enough without having to achieve crazy levels of success, then I don't think that I maybe would have pushed myself so hard, because I remember my thoughts at that time were not that I need to prove to myself that I can do this, because I already knew that I could. Or at least I think I did.
I was going to say, that's impressive in itself.
Right? It's one of those where I've always been taught to be a hard worker. So it was more of, if I knew I worked hard enough, I would be able to create results. But it was like, but what if the results are not high enough? What if everyone around me sees that I'm not this level of success? Because in my mind, there was no gray zone. It was, you are an incredible success. Like, you are wowing people, right? Or you're a dud. There was no in between for me.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like I have multiple answers to your question here, but one of my biggest things now is creating a success where you can thrive both professionally and personally. So actually, I think my greatest words of wisdom for myself would be asking myself, what will allow you to thrive both personally and professionally while you go through this? Because then I wouldn't have forgot about me as a human, right?
Yeah.
Not just my role.
Yeah, and is that kind of like reframing what success actually looks like too? Because there's so much talk about that nowadays of like, you need to reframe what success looks like. And that what you said about giving yourself permission keeps coming to mind as well. How do you think somebody, because I think that's the starting point. I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is that's the starting point. We got to give ourselves permission first to take these steps, to start this process. Right. Like that permission piece just keeps sticking in my head as something that's so powerful. Yeah. And I've felt that before too, where I'm like, I know that I'm a hard worker. I know that like I can reflect back and be proud of myself on certain things, even if I'm not where I want to be. But there's always this piece of, but what if I'm still not reaching my fullest potential? Right. And there's something that's really heavy with that. For other people who are experiencing that, listening, and this is all resonating, which I know there's so many people who what you're saying is resonating with them right now. How do they start to give themselves permission? Like what? Like, do you remember what kind of the first time you decided, I'm going to give myself permission to do what's right for me and to forget maybe a little bit about all these other things?
Yeah. For me, it started after the burnout, because it was so heavy that I knew I never, ever want to feel this again. And what I find challenging being in this seat is that I can see individuals going through this, and some of them aren't open to giving themselves permission. And it hurts because I can see the path that they're on, and I so badly just want to be able to stop it for them. But we as individuals need to want that for ourselves, or else nothing's going to change. And so I think it's literally giving yourself time and allowing yourself to think about your life. So often when life doesn't feel good, we run from it, right? We don't allow ourselves to think about the parts of our life that suck, right? They suck at the moment. They feel horrible. If I don't think about it, I'll cover it with this. I stay busy to avoid those thoughts, whatever it might be. But if you truly want to create change, you need to give yourself permission to think about the things that aren't feeling good. Because if you don't allow yourself to feel the depth of the pain, you're just going to keep masking it. So it starts with giving yourself permission to feel that pain. Even now, every now and then, like I don't know how long it is that will go in between, but I just want a good cry session. I'm like, you know what? I just need to work through some stuff right now. And I'm going to purposely bring on like the ugly tears, like grab the Kleenex box, nobody around. I just want to cry and scream and let whatever is in out, because that's the only way I know I'm going to move through it. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wants to give themselves permission, they need to start with, I know it's going to be ugly and I know it's not going to feel good at the moment, but I'm going to allow myself to really face what doesn't feel good right now and what life is going to look like if I continue to mask it. Mm-hmm. And am I okay with what it's going to look like? Because if the answer is no, I'm not okay with what it's going to look like, then it's having that hard conversation with yourself. Then what am I going to do about it? And the what am I going to do about it starts with, I give myself permission to do something. Mm-hmm. And so often we feel like, you know, we're these warriors. We have to take on so much and take the biggest leap forward and do 10 new things. No, you don't. Just start with one thing. Because I promise you, if you probably start with 10 things, you're not going to sustain it. Mm-hmm. You're going to go back to where you were because it's going to feel too hard to keep up with. But if you can give yourself permission to do just one thing differently. And my one thing that I started with was working out. Because I wasn't working out before and I thrive when I do. Right? I didn't have time, in quotations, but I made the time. Mm-hmm. And then that led to the next beautiful thing, then the next, then the next, then the next.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that's a big proponent of what I try and preach as well, is you don't have to do it all right away. And this is from me being somebody who often I had that all-in mentality. Totally. Where it's like, I'm either going to go for it all in or I'm not going to do it at all. And that leads to burnout very fast, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so important for people to recognize that you don't have to do it all today. Yes. But you just start with one thing and like allow it, give yourself permission to let things build. Right. Right? Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful.
And that, just you saying that reminds me of like the whole overnight success stories. Mm-hmm. You know, it's, when you look into these overnight successes, it's them doing this hard work for years that has led to this overnight success. So, but we on the outside think, wow, this just happened for them like that, right? So it's these tiny steps that has happened over years that allowed them to get to where they are. Not by doing 100 and then, you know, next month, holy crap, look at me, I'm amazing. Yeah. No, it's not reality.
Yeah, and when you look at a lot of people who are quote unquote like super successful, when these people write books or you mm-hmm. read into their actual stories, or even you hear like I know like Gary Vaynerchuk is somebody who I've followed for a long time, and he often talks about how he has so many billionaire friends and they're miserable. Yeah, like they're not happy, they're burnt out, they're constantly stressed, and it's like placing more value on, you know, not necessarily having to be a millionaire, but you could be so much happier being somebody who makes, you know, $50,000 a year, but like you've prioritized the things that truly matter in life, right? I think there's a lot of power to that, and I think we need to make that louder still.
I agree. And it reminds me so much of the study that was done where that nurse worked in a nursing home with people in the last days of their life. Are you familiar with this one?
I think so. I think I've heard of this, but yeah.
Yeah. So basically this nurse works with the dying, right? In their last, you know, number of days before they die. And she decided to do the study and ask everybody in their last days, what are your biggest regrets from life? And there were a number of common themes that came through, but one of them was working too much. Mm-hmm. Like, how is it that the vast majority of people, when they're on their deathbed, say, I regret working so much? And the vast majority of people who are alive are like, I just need to work harder, more, right? Yeah. And then that's the biggest regret. Or not living a life true to me. Living a life based off of other people's desires or perceived desires versus my own. What if we started creating a life based off of what we wanted at the end, right? So that you could look back at the end of your life being so proud of what you've built and the feelings along the way. What could life look like then versus just, oh my God, I need to work harder now, and then having a life of regret? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that sits really deep with me.
Yeah, likewise, that resonates. And it kind of, there's a lot of touching on that imposter syndrome. I want to talk a little bit about it. So I was looking up this morning. I was like, I want to try and find a like a definition for imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find like a true definition of it.
Okay.
But so I'm going to go off the Wikipedia one.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you what I found. It says it's a psychological experience of intellectual and professional fraudulence. Now, what really stood out to me about that was fraudulence, right? Like that's a powerful word. And I think there's a lot of people who experience that. And the reason why that just came to mind as well is oftentimes when you ask some of the most successful people in your life, like, what's your biggest fear with your success? Most of the time it's like, I've heard this many, many times where they say, my biggest fear is that people will actually figure out the fact that I actually have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Right. I'm just making it up as I go and just like working hard and failing and then adjusting and pivoting. Right. I think there's so much of that in, not just in the successful people in life, but even people who are trying to reach that success of like, do I belong here?
Yeah.
Right. Can you speak to that a little bit? And maybe just even a little bit more, you mentioned that you kind of struggled with imposter syndrome a little bit. How did you kind of navigate that? How did you first recognize that you were dealing with that? And then how did you start to create that change with that?
Oh gosh, it's been a journey.
It's a loaded question too.
Well, I'm going to bring it back to this. If we talk about the definition of imposter syndrome, I truly believe that every single individual experiences imposter syndrome. And if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, it's because you are avoiding opportunities for growth. Because if you surround yourself by people who have more experience, more knowledge, whatever it is by you, then chances are you see yourself on a lower tier, simply just because they have more experience or knowledge or whatever it might be. So if you're surrounding yourself by those people, it's going to feel like imposter syndrome. But if you're constantly surrounding yourself by people that aren't aiming for much, that aren't doing much, that are at the same level or perhaps below, maybe you don't feel imposter syndrome. So this is really a revelation that I've had in the last year is maybe imposter syndrome is a good thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Maybe if we use it to our advantage and we chase imposter syndrome in a way where we're not knocking ourselves down with it, right? Telling ourselves we're not good enough because this person achieved this. Rather, we see it as an opportunity to grow. Who can I become? What can I achieve if I'm around these people? Versus, oh my God, I'm not good enough. They've done this, they've done that. Right? Because I guarantee you, and what I've seen time and time again, is people who I've looked up to and done that. When I have true, raw, vulnerable conversations, the things that they say about me is like, what? How can you see me in that light? And they wonder the same about them, right? And so the most successful people on this planet, they experience imposter syndrome like crazy. So just because we experience it doesn't mean we actually are a fraud or that we're not good enough. It just means that we're put ourselves in environments where there's opportunity to grow and learn. Yeah.
That's really powerful. And that, like, I love that reframing of it where we focus on imposter syndrome being such a bad, negative thing.
Right.
It kind of brings up social media in my mind because so many people are experiencing imposter syndrome based off of social media. And so many people, I have this argument all the time with people where people say social media is so bad, it's so negative, it creates like all this comparison and stuff. I kind of have a different view on it where I think social media is not inherently negative, but it exposes us to our own flaws and negativities and mindsets. You look at somebody on social media and you're like, I keep comparing myself to this person. It makes me feel negative, so social media is negative. Like, well, no, that's actually giving you a clue maybe towards, your own mindset. Yes. And I love what you said about using that, imposter syndrome, or if we say comparison even, as like a sign of growth. Right. If you approach it with curiosity, if you are purposely, intentionally putting yourself in a room where you do feel inferior, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. That can be a really positive thing of getting curious, like, do I belong here? Can I prove to myself that I belong with this group? And what can I learn from these individuals to become that next evolution of myself? That's something that I've really,
for a long time, I think I've embraced is putting myself in places where, you know, the old version of me would say, you don't belong. But the newer version of me, it's constantly an evolution, right? Far from perfect. And sometimes I'll need to remind myself, you do belong here. And what can you learn from these people, right? I joined a group a while ago where it was 6, 7, and 8-figure business women. And you could only be one of these women to be a part of this group. And it was like, whew, you know, you're sitting in a room with 7, 8-figure business women. That's intimidating. But you sit down and have a conversation with them. They're not different than you or I.
Yeah.
Right? They're a human with a heart that wants to be accepted, wants to be loved, also wants to be successful. But they're not inherently different. And so, yeah, I think just giving yourself permission to be in those rooms and to show up with curiosity. I love that you brought that up, right? What can I learn from them? You know, what might come of this versus just showing up being like, I'm not meant to be here and this is horrible and look at them versus look at me. And, you know, it's okay if we have that mentality to start off with, but it's important to acknowledge it and then be able to do something with it. And if we're not able to do something with it on our own, to be able to reach out in various capacities, right? And find somebody who can be able to help you walk along that, because it's the mindset piece. If you believe that you can achieve and you believe that you deserve to be there, you're going to get through so much more in life than just constantly knocking yourself down.
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a lot more enjoyable to be like, ooh, what can I do? Or what might this look like?
Yeah. Look at the possibilities, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's an important reminder for people too. There might be people who maybe they got a promotion and they're having that imposter syndrome where they're like, I don't belong in this room with the executives now, or whatever it might be. But it's like, you wouldn't be there if you didn't belong there.
Right.
Right? Like, things don't often happen just by accident like that.
That's right.
At least in my beliefs. Like, I think that we are put in positions that we are meant to be in for some reason. Like, maybe it's to figure out that this group doesn't align with where I want to be. Maybe that's the lesson there.
Yeah.
But like, you're there for a reason. You wouldn't be there. You wouldn't have gotten that promotion if you weren't meant to be in that room.
Right.
And like you said, like, maybe you get in there and it's overwhelming, but there's opportunity in that, right?
Yeah.
Like, endless opportunities.
For sure. Yeah. And I love the, you're meant to be there. Like, you're invited in. I just had a conversation with a client about this just a couple of days ago, just before the weekend. And he was saying that he's like, maybe I'm not meant to be doing this. Maybe this is just too much. It's like, maybe. But do you think that also there was a reason why they hired you in the first place? Because I can guarantee you there wasn't just one reason they hired and selected you. Of all of the applicants, there was many reasons. Sometimes just sitting with that and allowing ourselves to be curious as to how others see us versus just how we see ourselves can be helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah, I often tell, like, I teach martial arts, and I have students who sometimes struggle with going to competitions, or like they struggle with like a particular, maybe they struggle with the fighting side of it, or they struggle with the performance side of it where they go up and present, and even working with like fitness nutrition clients. But it comes up a lot where it's like we're telling ourselves these stories, right? And I always tell them, like, if you believe you can do it, you're right. If you believe you can't do it, you're also right.
Yes.
Right? Because like all these things, like our thoughts, not to get too like woo-woo and spiritual, but like our thoughts are not real. Like, they're not something that's real that we're living.
Right.
They're all make-believe. All of our beliefs, they're make-believe. Right? Like, we choose whether it's real or not, and it's only when we put it into action that it actually becomes real in this moment, in this present moment. And it's something that I recognize more and more in my life as I gain new experiences and try new things and just kind of grow as an individual, is like you just like you can't think that every thought that you have is true, is real.
Right.
Because I mean, it is true, but if you change the thought, it's also true. And so I think that's an important thing for people who, are maybe feeling like they're struggling to be where they are. They don't feel like they belong there. It's like, if you think you belong, you do. And if you don't think you belong, like, you're making that true based off the actions. Right?
Yeah. You're going to act and show up profoundly different if you don't think you belong, and you're not going to be reaching out to people. And then in return, you're going to see, well, there's no interaction. See, I'm not meant to be here.
Yeah.
Versus, you believe you're going to be there, and you're going to be going up to people, and you're going to be engaging in conversation. And, it's going to be interesting conversation because you're excited to be there. And so, your realities become very different based off of what you're telling yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of like you manifest it into like your physical being.
Yeah.
Right? With your thoughts. Yeah. I find that super interesting. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned one of the first things you did for yourself to start to kind of pull yourself away from that burnout was exercise.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit on just how exercise kind of impacts? Because I'm a really big believer, obviously, in the holistic approach. Like the physical impacts the mental, and the mental impacts the physical. I'm curious how you felt that.
Yeah. Well, so after I had burnt out, I sat down with myself and asked myself this question. What have I done in the past that has allowed me to thrive? Because clearly I was not thriving, right? So there was a number of things missing. And it was just a messy bullet point list that I made for myself. And one of the things was being physically active on a regular basis. Before having kids, I was active all the time. Once I had, especially both boys, it was telling myself I didn't have that time. And so I just completely stopped. So I've never been a big gym goer, but I liked working out at home. And so I had just gone on YouTube and just found some workout exercises that I would enjoy. Someone who I actually enjoyed listening, doing them, not like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here, or who is this person, or whatever, right? So I connected in some way with the person that was leading it. And it was just 30 minutes every morning, Monday through Friday, 30 minutes, right? Set my alarm earlier. And to be clear, I am not a morning person. I don't love the mornings. I am not this like happy, like, let's have this great conversation in the mornings. I'm like, I'm tired. Like, don't talk to me. Like,
give me coffee.
Right. But I knew that I wasn't going to do it consistently in the evenings because I come home from work. Then, I'm picking up the boys from daycare. I'm helping to make dinner. There's stuff around the house, getting the boys to bed at a decent time. And then by the time that's done, I'm exhausted. Right. So I knew it wasn't going to happen in the evening. So I chose a time where I knew I would be most likely to be consistent. And that was first thing in the mornings. And I just started doing this 30-minute workout 5 days a week. And, at first sometimes I had to force myself because I didn't feel like it, right? I don't want to go do this, but I had my clothes set aside the evening before. So I was setting myself up for success, telling myself, Jennifer, you're going to do this in the morning. And I just wouldn't allow myself to feed myself any BS. If the BS came up, nope, you're doing this. It doesn't matter if you feel like it. You're doing this. You committed to it. You're doing this, right? And it was allowing myself to have that internal dialogue, telling myself that it doesn't matter whether you feel like it or not. This is what's happening. And after some time, it wasn't I had to think about, should I get up, or, maybe I will, maybe I don't. It's like, no, this is what I do, right? And I mean, that was years ago, and I'm still in this. It's not a habit anymore. It's just my lifestyle, right? Because this is what I need to thrive. And physically, 100%, right? It did change my mindset. It did change the energy. It did change, what I'm incapable of. It was just another way to prove to myself that, hey, time does exist when I allow myself to see the time, or to find the time, create the time, however you want to word it. And I think that was a really big eye opener for, hey, this time has always existed. I just didn't utilize it before.
Yeah.
And so that allowed me to start utilizing my time for other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the cliche of like, we all have the same 24 hours. Right. And I always push back on that a little bit. And through like gaining empathy from working with clients who, I'd say, I was always that coach at the beginning of my career where I was like, we all have the same 24 hours, just make it work kind of thing. But then when you actually listen to people, you recognize, and then I also experienced it as well, where like I was a business owner. Yeah. I was married, and I had a wife who worked in the corporate world. Yeah. And I really started to recognize like, we have a very different 24 hours. Like my 24 hours, I've got flexibility throughout the day and stuff. Like, and hers was very, very different. Yeah. Right. And, it gave me empathy towards people to recognize that, no, we don't have the same 24 hours. However, we all have 24 hours.
Right.
How are you utilizing it?
Yes.
Right. So like not comparing yourself to like, because, okay, I'm curious about this. And then I have another question as well, but do you get a lot of, cause like just looking at you, like you look like somebody who's physically active, you look fit. Like I get this a lot too, where people are like, oh, it must be easy for you because like you're just a fitness person, right? Like being like somebody who is a personal trainer, I would get that all the time. Well, it's easy for you. You're passionate about fitness.
Right.
And I would say like, it's not easy for me. I still struggle to get out of bed some days.
Right.
I still like struggle to get myself into the gym. But you talked about something that sounded a lot to me like just being disciplined and setting yourself up for success. Is that something you've experienced as well, where people just kind of like assume towards you that like, oh, you look active, you must be passionate about it, must be easy for
100%. It's funny because when you say that, another thing comes to mind is happiness as well. Well, it's easy for you to be happy. I can just see that that's who you are. Yeah. Maybe, but let me also tell you that for both happiness and for working out, they both can be intentional effort. It can be me deciding the night before what I want my day to look like the next day. And then it's me that morning setting myself up by like intentionally setting that time to do the things that are going to allow me to feel happier, to be more active, more physical, to thrive in that, not to wait and see if happiness shows up, not to wait and see if I'm going to thrive in my physical body and form. It's creating it. I truly believe that I know success and happiness happen. And I believe they are now one and the same, right? Happiness is part of that success. You're not successful if you're not happy as well. They happen because you intentionally create it. And I intentionally create it. And no, it hasn't always been easy. Hence why I burnt out, right? So was it easy just to be like, oh, I'm at the deepest, darkest place of my life, and then I'm going to start getting up at 5 a.m. before the boys are even awake to get them ready to go to daycare, to get ready to go to work for the day? No, it wasn't easy. But what's also not easy is reaching your deepest, darkest place, is not being happy every day. That is not easy. So we can talk about like what's easy and not. It's like, okay, and how's it going to feel for the next few years to ignore your physical health? Watch those health symptoms just climb on up. How's it going to feel to ignore your happiness for the next few years? Is that easy? No. So what hard are you going to choose? I chose the hard that would eventually lead to an easier life. Doesn't mean that it's easier, but I shouldn't say an easier life. I chose the hard that leads to a happier life. Let's put it that way.
It's interesting. I remember I was in therapy once, and I was talking about like not feeling like, it's like I feel like I took the easy route in life sometimes, where like I didn't get as much education, or I just wanted to like build my business, and that was my focus. And my therapist kind of flipped it on me, and they were like, well, is that the easier route? Like a lot of people would view that as like you took the harder route. Right. Like it would have been easier to go and like get all these credentials and stuff, to have those to lean on. And it was a really powerful shift for me, where I was like, yeah, I didn't actually look at it that way. So it's a really powerful contrast to look at it like that. Yeah. I'm curious. So just going back a little bit back to the exercise, because you mentioned you noticed kind of mental and emotional changes. I'm curious if you can kind of pinpoint some of the specific changes that you felt through exercise.
I feel like it's kind of a blur a while ago. It's all fuzzy. But, I just remember almost having more clarity in my day, like more mental clarity, more energy in a way. And I think the clarity piece was actually the biggest because, well, hold on. Okay. The clarity and also, wow, like I'm starting to feel like my body feels good again, right? That up levels the level of like happiness, the positive thoughts that are happening when you feel good in your physical body versus like, this this doesn't feel good, whether it be stomach aches and pains, or you're just physically not happy with the way you look. It doesn't matter. It's all leading to those quality of thoughts.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just the actual act of working out led to greater mental clarity. And that greater mental clarity also allowed me to see what else I needed in my life to thrive. Mm-hmm. Right? So working out, it was an important first step for me, but it wasn't necessarily the end all be all. It wasn't the only thing that I needed to thrive. So for me, actually, by working out, part of the workout regime that I was doing, they had talked about this one lady who did a meditation program at the time. I never would have considered meditation before, right? Mm-hmm. But having a greater sense of clarity and trying new things again, it kind of, I think, opened up that door for a more open-minded mindset.
Yeah.
And then that led to some beautiful things. So for me, working out was having a little bit more oomph, a little bit more spark in my day, and greater clarity of mind, which helped improve the quality of thoughts as well.
Yeah. It sounds like confidence is a big thing that came from that. And that's something that I resonate with.
Yeah.
I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it's something that I resonate with as well, where like there's this negative thing around wanting to look good as well. I've noticed that where like it's almost like we don't want to use that as a reason why we work out. I was thinking about just this the other day. Yeah, and I was like, I do like to look good. Like I like it when I take my shirt off and I don't feel embarrassed. Right. And like I'm like, oh, I actually have some muscles there.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like a better version of myself to look good. And I don't necessarily think that needs to be a negative thing. No. Right? There's so much about like body shaming and stuff like that. But I think we actually have maybe swung a little bit too far that way, where it's like you can be proud of your body. If you've worked hard for it and it now your body reflects the values that you hold in life, why not be proud of that? Why not let that be something that kind of carries you through your life? I mean, you don't want to be egotistical about it where you're like, look at my muscles. Yeah. Like, I've never been that guy, but I do think that that's something that's been interesting for me anyways.
Right.
Just reflecting on that and going, no, I do like to look good, and I don't need to feel like guilty or ashamed about that.
Well, and I find that it depends on who we surround ourselves with too, right? Because sometimes you'll hear that where it's just like, oh, as if you need to work out, or as if you don't need to eat that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and they're not coming from a place of that they're trying to put me down.
Yeah.
But in that moment, it's just like, well, but my goals are just as important to me as your goals are to you.
Yeah.
Right? Just because we might be different weights, just because we might have different goals for how far we run or how much weight we lift or how many times we work out, doesn't make my goals any more important or less than yours.
Yeah.
Right? What if we were just to celebrate each other for wanting to be our healthiest, happiest selves?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you want to have a six pack and you feel good about you when you do, freaking do it.
Yeah.
Right? And not everybody wants to work out 5 days a week. Some people, they just want to move, right? One of my clients, for her, she's like, I don't want to work out. But movement, that's one of my things. So I want to go golfing and I want to go play tennis. Right on.
Yeah.
Because she's going to be able to sustain that. And I'm going to support her, whether she's a client or she's a friend or she's just a stranger on the street. If she is living her version of feeling good and moving her body in a way that supports her, all the power to you, right? You should not be made feel bad because of whatever your physical goal is. And so, I think it is, there has been a swing in terms of, I think, trying to take less of a focus off of the physical, like what do we look like physically and just being healthy. And I think it's good because, you know what, we're not all meant to look like, what the magazines used to be, or in many cases still are, but just let's root each other on.
Yeah.
Let's help each other create our best form of health and happiness.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's about.
Yeah, I love that. And what I was hearing from you was that the physical skills that you were building and the physical actions that you were taking with exercise actually put you in a position to create more opportunity for the things that steered you away from burnout.
Yes.
It gave you the opportunities to go for hikes and to do these things where you felt better about those things. And so that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that reframe.
Yeah, of course, of course. Okay, so I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to give you a question that my last guest wrote down. I haven't read it yet, so I haven't even read it. So I'm going to give that to you, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to do the same and write a question for my next guest. But before I get to that question, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I apologize in advance, but what are your top 5 things that people can do? So strategies or actions that people can take. People right now who have listened to this and they're like, you know what? I am on that path to burnout. I need to change something. What are the top 5 things you recommend people do?
First of all, sit down and find a place where you feel good, where you feel more relaxed than you do stressed. So maybe it's at a coffee shop, maybe it's outside on your back deck or your front porch, but just find a place that allows you to feel at ease. Have your favorite drink, nourishing drink, hopefully. It can be coffee, tea, cold, whatever. But find a place where you feel more relaxed. And then grab a piece of pen, a piece of paper, and just write down bullet points. It's not meant to be pretty. It's not meant to be an Instagram post about what it is that will allow you to feel successful, both professionally and personally. So sit down, write that down. And then on another piece of paper, on the backside of it, whatever it might be, write down what you can start doing that will get you one step closer to living that life. One thing. Not a whole series of things, one thing. Write down one thing that you should stop doing because it's currently deterring from that lifestyle. And then one thing that you're already doing that you can continue doing. So what can you start, what can you stop, and what can you continue? And then from there, find yourself somebody who you can be accountable with, right? Oftentimes we find it a lot harder to be accountable to ourselves than to other people. It's like, if I let myself down, I didn't actually work out today. It's not a big deal. But, right? If Kyle knew I didn't work out today, that would not be okay. Like I would need to work out so that Kyle knew I worked out. So find yourself that accountability buddy and make sure it's somebody who's actually going to hold you accountable. Yeah. A lot of time we have those friends, those colleagues where they're like, yeah, I'll do it. But they don't actually follow up with you or whatever it might be. Like
they bail,
right? They don't hold their end of the stick. Yeah. What I tell a lot of people is like, who is that person in your life? Not everybody can, if you can have a coach or a mentor or somebody, but not everybody can have that in their life. Find somebody who you say, I will reach out to you every single day after I do this. And if I don't reach out to you one day, I will take you out to your favorite restaurant or to that play you've been wanting to go to or something that you're going to be like, I don't want to spend my money doing that. Yeah. And they're going to be like, I want this free meal or, I want this thing. So they're likely going to follow up with you. You need to have a plan as to how you're going to continue doing these things. You said you're going to start, stop, or continue so that they don't just fall by the wayside because you're too busy.
Yeah, I love that idea of like almost a reverse bet. I've done that many, many times in my life where I'm like, if I don't do this, this is the thing. Or I was like, I'm a huge Flames fan. So it's like, maybe it's like, I'm going to donate $500 to the Oilers or something,
yes.
Right? Like, it's like, hell no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to make sure that I commit to this. But then you have somebody who keeps you accountable to that. Yeah. Where you're like, okay, if I don't do this, you have to make sure I actually follow through with this thing.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, those are great tips. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right. We're going to open this up and see what the question is for you. So I'll read it out to you. I don't know what it is. But let's see. Where did they write it? Okay, here it is. What's one place you feel like you can be yourself 100%? So this actually resonates well with what you were just saying. It's good. Yeah. One place you feel like you can be yourself 100%.
It's interesting because two things come to mind. I know it's in one place, but I thought of one person. I'm thinking of multiple people now, the more I think about it. However, the first person that came to mind, focus, Jennifer. The first person that came to mind is my friend Tina. She's my best friend. But the place that came to mind, because it actually said place, was nature. I love nature. Like, I love it. Like, even just talking about it, I'm like, I get so giddy. Yeah. Because it makes me so happy. I feel so free when I'm a part of nature. And I think part of why Tina also comes into that is because we know that we can just show up non-judgmental, right? I can show up as my happiest, most giddy, most weird self, and she's going to dig it and just also be, like whatever feels right for her in the moment. Or I can just show up and just bawl my eyes out. And both are okay and both are accepted. Yeah. And I feel like nature really allows that full version of those to come out of me. Right? When we go for those maybe that's my next goal is my weekly hikes, but right now they're monthly.
Yeah.
But when we go for those hikes, it's all of those, right? Like I remember my birthday was just over a week ago, and I took the day off so we could go for this hike. We hike up to this area, and you get up to the top of this one section, and then it just opens up the mountain range on the other side, and it's just beautiful. And I swear to God, I'm like dancing around and giddy like a little 5-year-old, because it just, to me, it's like, it's better than a candy shop for a little kid. Like it just feels that way for me. So nature, it brings out a really amazing side of me.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such an important thing for people who are thinking about what you said before too, of like, who's that person where I can go to and be accountable for. Is so powerful when it's somebody who you feel like you can be your 100% authentic self.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Can I ask though? Because I really want to hear your answer.
My answer?
Can you answer that one?
Yeah, it's actually, so for the person, it's the same thing. I have a really good friend here in Calgary that I've brought my deepest, darkest things to, and no judgment. Things that, sometimes I'm like, oh, I can't believe I just did this, or that type of thing, or hey, I'm really like unsure about what to do. I don't know how many times I've gone to this person and been like, hey, I'm sorry, I got another thing I need to complain about right now.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I will tell you if I'm at capacity to deal with this right now, but please bring me your things. So definitely that. In terms of the place that I am 100% myself, I feel like it's anytime I'm doing martial arts, especially teaching it. Yeah, that's something I've really recognized in myself over the last few years. Is I'm most myself when I'm in that setting. And it's funny, I'll tell you a quick story, and then I want to be mindful of your time, but I do some work where I build some youth programs and facilitate youth programs, and this is for a nonprofit. But I was doing this thing where it's a multi-sport program. So each week we do different sports. And the one week we did martial arts. And I was like, well, I'll facilitate that because I teach martial arts. So the manager of the actual facility that we were renting from, I guess, said to one of my coworkers afterwards, who is that guy I'd been there for weeks already. They're like, who is that guy that was teaching the martial arts? He was fantastic. She's like, well, that's Kyle. He's the one facilitating all these groups. But I said to them, I'm like, that's so interesting for me to hear, because it just goes to show how much I step into my authentic self, and how much I am almost I wouldn't say I'm a different person, but just how much it shows when I'm in that role of like teaching the martial arts, because I'm facilitating all these different sports. But when I was doing the martial arts, they were like, who is that guy? Right. And so that was a cool thing for me to kind of recognize that, of like, that's me, like 100% authentic. Yeah. Stepping into my being.
I think that question was so interesting about who is this guy, right? Like how you were just showing up profoundly different when you were in something that you were so passionate about.
Yeah.
Ooh, that sparks something.
Yeah. Like it definitely gave me like butterflies when they told me. I was like, that's so cool. But, I mean, we could talk for hours, right? I say this all the time on this show, but it's true. And I feel truly blessed to be able to sit down and talk with people like yourself, who are very inspiring and just like creating such a positive impact on other people in the world. So I appreciate you being here and sharing some of your stories and insights with my audience. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, because honestly, these types of conversations light me up.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful to be able to have, a true vulnerable conversation and be able to bring that more out into the world. So thank you.
Yeah. Likewise. We'll have to do it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who's listening and watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.